As I've covered on my WSET Level 3 course guide video, there is a tasting exam element to the overall course. The tasting exam is quite pressurised, half an hour to do 2 wines. So today I thought I'd take you through what to expect during the tasting exam and some of the keys that you may need to know to help you get through it. Hello and welcome to the Grape Explorer, where we celebrate the world of wine. On this channel we do wine education, product reviews and lots of tastings, so if you're interested in wine, consider subscribing. I think for many the tasting exam is the bit they dread the most. Multiple choice questions, short answer questions are pretty standard when it comes to an exam scenario. Those are the things you expect to be able to do. But when it comes to the tasting, it's all going to be about the wines that you're poured at that time. You've got no idea what you're going to be given, and then that of course gives you an element of the unknown. The questions that you've been asked during the multiple choice and the short answer, you know have been in the book and you should be able to refer to them, but you've really got no idea what you're going to be poured and presented with for the blind tasting. You cover off around 60 to 70 wines alone just during WSET at Level 3, so it could be 2 of any of those wines that you've had. Now what you're going to get are of course 2 different wines, typically a red and a white. What I will say is when it came to the exam that I took, I was actually given a dry wine and a sweet wine. The red was the dry and then there was a sweet wine as well. So what you would normally do if you were just presented with 2 dry wines, 1 white, 1 red, is you'd start off with the white and you'd end up finishing on the red. But of course, because I was presented with a sweet wine, I actually went for the dry red wine first, tasted that and then moved on to the sweet wine. You're going to be judged on a number of factors which are all related to the systematic approach to tasting, which you have to learn at WSET Level 3. You cannot take your tasting card into the exam. That's no surprise, of course. So it does mean that you need to be able to revise it in full. But what I'm going to do today is go through where the points are gained and some of the tips that I would give having gone through the exam myself. Now first off, you do have to stick to all of the description types that are on the systematic approach to tasting card. Although you don't take it into the exam itself, you do need to stick to those specific descriptors which you've learned as part of the course. So for example, if the wine is ruby, you have to state ruby. You can't state brick colour or something like that. You can't go off tangent and start to put in place your own descriptors hoping that the examiner knows what you mean. You also can't deviate between your choices, so you can't say something is pale to medium. You have to pick one of those. So if it is pale to medium ruby, you can't actually put that. You're going to have to land on something and say this is a medium ruby wine. When it comes to the aroma descriptions, if you're getting characteristics of red fruit, you can't simply list all the red fruits you can think of that were on the WSET tasting card. You have to be specific. It will be too obvious if you pick out simply every red fruit you can think of. So you need to be picking out sort of 3 or 4 really key descriptors for what you're getting from that wine. And importantly, you need to be able to say whether you think that wine is simple or not. Lots of people at the exam forget to put that something's aromas or tastes are simple. You don't have to put complex, but you do have to put simple. So if the wine is displaying simple characteristics of, say, cherry, plum, blackberry, please make sure you put the word simple in front of that. Even if it's got some secondary characters but they're considered quite simple in nature, you do need to call that out. And there is a point available for simply saying whether something is simple or not. So you'll have been through the WSET tasting card thoroughly by way of revision and of all the wines that you've tasted during the course. So you should be familiar that when it comes to the appearance, you're talking about the colour, the intensity of the colour, the clarity and any other observations you may have. Though please note there aren't any other marks available for any other observations. Once you come onto the aroma, again it's the condition, the intensity, some of those characteristics and the development as well. And the development is where you may put whether something's simple or not. Now the way that I approach the tasting exam, and it may be something that you've been taught yourself as part of your course when it comes to the aromas, is that I actually allocated things individually. So when I was checking for the aromas on the wine, initially I would just focus on primary aromas, then I'd focus on secondary aromas, and if needed I'd focus on tertiary aromas. And by doing that I was able to separate everything out rather than trying to think of everything all at one time. Rather than trying to think, okay, I'm getting some cherry, am I getting some vanilla, am I getting some coconut? I just thought, right, what fruits am I getting? And that's how I went through it. And that for me worked out really well. And it's the same when it came to the palate as well. You need to talk about the acidity, the body, the alcohol, the length, all of these different things. And by doing them individually and thinking about, okay, I'm going to take a taste of this wine now, and I'm just going to check on what I think the acidity is like. That really broke it down for me and really helped me with my tasting when it came to the exam. Now, for both the aroma and the palate characteristics, there are of course going to be some extra marks available. There are up to 5 available for aroma and 3 available for palate. So do think carefully about what you've written down. If you've only written down cherry and plum, for example, you've already missed out on some marks. So think carefully about those aromas that you're getting on the wine, but don't simply list all of them that are available. Finally, you're going to come to that conclusion: balance, length, intensity, complexity, as well as potential for aging, whether something is good for drinking now, whether it has potential for aging. And of course, marks are available for all of these. The one difference between the red and the white is that when it comes to the red, you're going to be talking about tannin, which you're not when it comes to the white wine. And like I say, during my exam, I had a red wine, which was a simple red wine, as it turned out, and I had a sweet wine, which was actually quite complex in nature. Now, you don't need to name the grape varietals or the region or the sub-region when it comes to tasting. This is all about you showing how you've learned about the different characteristics as you've gone through the course, and you're able to describe a wine in detail without necessarily having to name that wine. So the exam isn't easy. Half an hour for 2 wines. If you're finding that you're tasting a lot of the wine as you go through it, you can ask for a refill, so don't worry if you run out. My sweet wine was particularly nice during the exam, so I actually just drank it and then asked for a little bit more because I was enjoying it, and it was at the end of the exam, so I felt pretty comfortable with that. I was really happy I scored distinction when it came to the tasting, and that's because I did take my time and I used that approach that I've gone through on the video here. I broke everything down into its component parts. I didn't rush through any of it. I thought about the length. I took a sip, left it for a little while and thought about what that length of that particular wine was. I then took another sip and thought about, okay, what's the alcohol like in this particular wine? Doing it that way, for me, was a really kind of systematic approach to tasting. That's what they're looking for from you. But it really helped me get a good mark in the tasting exam. But over to you. Any tips or suggestions yourself for a tasting exam? What works for you? And if you have any other questions for me as well, let me know in the comments section below. I'm the Grape Explorer. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.